shepherd's song, the herald summons, your king returns. What's written on the pages echo through the ages. Shema Yisrael, you must hear Yahowah's words so clear. In this night and in the day, echoes never fade away. David's songs forever sing. Mashiach's gift to you we bring. Lift the shofar to the sky. Yahowah is El Shaddai. Shema Yisrael, hear the sound, a message for you coming down. Daughters of Zion, lift your voice. The time has come to make your choice. Shema Yisrael, you must hear Yahowah's words so clear. In this night and in the day, echoes never fade away.
Well, good evening and happy Shabbat to one and all. I'm here with the Kirk this evening, and we are ready to return to our analysis of Yahweh's final plan for his people, how he is going to cleanse and dress up Yisrael, purge her of her guilt, so that she can be restored in her relationship to Dod, the Messiah, and eternal King of everything upon his return. And so it really is an interesting plan that God came up with as to how he will take the covenant family at the last minute, literally 10 days before his return, away and bring them to Shamaim, while then providing a remedy for the mortal remnant of Yisrael that is left behind, so that they have the opportunity to come clean and to embrace Yahweh upon his return. I think this time a week ago, I shared with you something that said that along the lines that we were going to rebrand much of our message, not only in the way we communicate our message to Yisrael and to the world at large, going principally to video blogging, if you will, a video broadcast of our message, and something that we intend to create as many as 5 to 10 or more of these video casts per week. Also, that the overall branding was transitioning from Yada Yahweh to Yahweh, and that the signature, an original series that we wrote together so many years ago, which is Yada Yahweh, and there's 8 volumes that comprise it, will remain under the same title, but the umbrella for all of the books is simply going to be Yahweh. And I shared that God and I had a conversation about this very topic a week ago. And that's something I don't very often do. I think there's only been 4 private conversations that I've shared publicly, either in writing or as part of this program. And I typically don't do it unless there is a written affirmation that the message is verifiable. And the reason for that is quite simply, there really is no way for anyone to ascertain whether or not God said something to me privately. But it is very easy to validate whether the message that I'm conveying from Yahweh is accurate when I'm citing the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. So virtually everything I have written and shared is based on a translation of something Yahweh conveyed through one of his prophets, so that you can verify that God indeed said these very things. So last week, when I'm having this moment and with God, and I was asking him about the branding of our program, and he says, my preference is that the overall title become Yahweh, and that we transition to a modern stylized menorah, a lamp, because it better defines the mission that we're undertaking at this time for my people. Well, wouldn't you know it? My wife had asked me, and she's asked me for this for some time. It's actually an anniversary gift to translate and comment on Mizmor Psalms 110 through 116, which is what I'm doing now in the midst of what is becoming Coming Home 3. And in the 112th Mizmor, Yahweh says, I have chosen Yahweh, the name I prefer, answering the question that I asked about branding. And he also goes as far as to say that what we're doing serves as a light in a dark world, and therefore the menorah. So it is interesting that there is no private conversation I've had thus far with God that isn't also affirmed within his testimony. In fact, the very reason that we are here talking about what's going to transpire on Towrah and 6,000 Yah in 2033 is largely because of a question that I asked God probably now 6 years ago. And the question was quite simply, what's going to happen to the world that we leave behind on Towrah?
Yeah.
And God's answer was, so where do you think you're going? I never really had an appreciation for that answer until we translated Yahshua 17, 5, 6, and 7, where it actually makes it quite clear that I'm not going anywhere on Towrah, that I will orchestrate the final gleaning of the covenant family on what will be September 23rd, a Friday evening, as they stream as a river of light to Shamayim, heaven. But the following morning, I'm still here with the mortal remnant of Yisrael. As a matter of fact, on the morning of Towrah, I have lost my horns, so to speak, my ability to ward off the serpents and snakes of the world, this one and also the spiritual realm. And I let my guard down and actually taunt Hasatan into taking my life as the red heifer. So indeed, where do you think you're going? And so it is with that in mind that we are now reviewing what can be known about the prophecies pursuant to this event, so that Yisrael, you know what's going to happen. Should any of this be more than you want to digest, this idea that Yahweh would ask one of his prophets, or in this case a messenger, after doing virtually everything that Yahweh has asked, to lay down his life for the benefit of his people so that they might live. I would remind you that the Passover lamb was God's beloved son. Yeah. So it should not be a surprise that the red heifer is his son's herald, Yahweh's voice to his people at this time. Last week, I think we ended our program right around Yahshua, Isaiah 63:12. I'm going to backtrack just a bit so that we read everything in context. Let's begin with Yahshua. Yahshua means Yahweh delivers, Yahweh liberates, and Yahweh saves, as well as Yahweh protects, keeping from harm's way. It is Isaiah, now called 63:8. For he said, now it will be true. My people will no longer be children who deceive and mislead, and so he will become for them an approaching Savior. This is a very loaded statement. In the first 12, 13, actually 10 to be exact if we're talking the book of Yahshua Isaiah, the first 10 chapters of Isaiah are devoted entirely to Yahweh condemning the religiosity of his people. God hates religion. And the religion that he is the most annoyed by actually is Judaism. It's done more harm to Jews than either Christianity or Islam. In fact, without Judaism, there would be no Christianity or Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the book then of Hosea, God says, you are not my children anymore. And I'm divorcing you. But he says that there will come a time where the relationship will be reconciled and that the children of Israel will be Yahweh's once again. And so here the prophet Yeshaya is saying something quite similar. He says, now it will be true, my people will no longer be children who deceive and mislead. Now, that's a little bit like, are you still beating your wife? No, because I've never beat my wife,
No.
and I'm not about to start now. But when it's stated this way, it's a good bad thing. It says they'll no longer deceive and mislead. That's really good, but it's speaking of the last 10 days of life on earth as we know it.
Oh, no.
And it indicates that in the millennia prior to that time, Israel was the king of deception and leading astray. And so it has been true. And then he will become for them an approaching Savior. This is interesting in the sense that what Dod did by fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim is that he, on Pesach, transformed mortal beings into immortal beings,
Mm-hmm.
giving them eternal life. And on Matzah, so that we would be prepared to be in Yah's company, he took the guilt of every covenant member and took it with him into Sheol and deposited there, never to be seen again, making us appear perfect in God's eyes because there is no evidence against us.
Wow.
And then on Bikurim, he was released from Sheol by way of the set-apart spirit and returned to Shamaim to be with his father, Yahweh. Now, that's quite different than what the red heifer, the Adamah Parah, does on Towrah. Now, in a way, there's some similarities in that Dod celebrated Pesach with his father by eating the Pesach meal, and I can assure you there was lamb on the plate,
Yes.
and that he understood the purpose of the upcoming sacrifice, but he did so on the beginning of Pesach, which would have been a Friday evening in that year, 33 CE. The following day, as the sun rose, he endured the ordeal where the ultimate beast of the day, in fact, the ultimate beast really of human existence since Imperial Rome morphed into the Roman Catholic Church, beat him, ripping the skin off of his mortal body, and then crucified him. This occurring on the Shabat, the following day, which is the same day, also Pesach. And the same will be true for the Zeroah and red heifer, a bull at the point of the evening of Towrah, also a Friday evening, the beginning of a Shabbat, when, by the way, God does his best work. So if you are in Yisrael and you're having a conniption fit because we are broadcasting, live streaming this message as the sun has set on a Friday evening on the Shabbat, I would like to remind you that God does his best work on the Shabbat, and that Shabbat is a verb and is actionable. The rabbis have it dead wrong. So On the evening of Shabbat, the Zeroah, Yah's cold voice, Dod's Bashar herald, which is an interesting term because it also speaks of the corporal body that his king sacrificed on Pesach, as well as the corporal body he will sacrifice the following morning. But the Bashar herald of Dod will celebrate the great and final gleaning of the covenant family on that Friday evening as the sun sets on September 23rd, 2033. Then the following morning, as was the case with Dod, as the sun rises, this time to a full solar eclipse, he will be transformed, having the horns removed, so that he becomes the Adam Parah, the bloody red man of the earth, been fruitful and now serving as the red heifer. And it was be on this day that he will give his life so that Israel might live. But this time, rather than giving the mortal immortality, what the Adam Parah sacrifice does is it gives the mortal a means to purge their religious and political guilt so that they can survive and enjoy Yahweh's arrival with the Messiah on Kippurim, October 2nd, 6:22 p.m. in Jerusalem. So it is a different outcome, very similar in the sense that guilt is purged, and in this case is purged because of the cleansing waters that will emanate from the Temple Mount underneath the sacrifice of the red heifer, just as they did when Eliah went through the dress rehearsal of this event. And the smoke will billow to the heavens, ash mixing with those waters, and the combination of the ash-laden waters and the flames of that fire will incinerate all existing guilt. That will enable Yisrael to come clean and be prepared for Yahweh's return. This remnant of Yisrael, however, is still mortal, but they will enter the millennial Shabbat prepared to meet God and then literally able to live in his presence, which you would think would cause the vast preponderance of those to embrace their God from that point forward.
Think so.
So throughout all of their afflictions and anguish, the messenger announcing his presence and appearance, who is liberating and saving them, will not be restricted. With his love, and due to his compassion and mercy, he will redeem them. Now, Yahshua is a bit of a propagandist. Now, he's not as big, what do they call them, fanboys. And I mean this in total respect. I think everyone who's listening to this program knows that I have a kinship for Yahshua. I love the man dearly.
Yes.
But he is over the top in his presentation of all things Choder, Bashar, Kol, Nakar, if it pertains to the mission that Yahweh has asked us to fulfill, Yahshua is not only there speaking of it, in this case, speaking of my sacrificial death at the conclusion of Towrah, saving the lives of a remnant of Yisrael, redeeming them. And I recognize that Yahshua is saying some of these things because for the 2,700 years, beginning at the time that he wrote these prophecies initially, to the time that we began to re-examine them and to translate them and then interpret them for our time so that Yisrael might know who was saying what to whom and why. as well as when this will all occur. No one had benefited from anything the great prophet had said. And then all of a sudden, the Shabuah and Towrah harvests are fruitful because the final Zeroah is heeding the message that Yahweh inspired Yahshua to write. That said, Kirk, you know how much I have tried to deflect praise, any kind of gratitude. Somebody writes and says, I really appreciate what you've done by making these books available on these shows. And, I've come to know Yahweh. And my response has always been the same. I am delighted that you're part of the covenant family. You will enjoy every minute you spend with our God, Yahweh. And I encourage you to continue to grow in your relationship with him. But all I did was translate and then interpret the message God was conveying to us. And therefore, he deserves all the credit. Well, if you read the 112th Mizmor, that is not Yahweh's perspective on this. And if you think by listening to this we're a little overboard in conveying what Yahshua had to say, one of these days we're going to do a program on the 112th Mizmor. And my goodness, ever delighted with everything we've done. And he just says it's light for a dark world. Everything that is being said is valid and correct. It is vindicating. And that through it all, there has been only boldness, ultimate confidence. There hasn't been a misstep. It's truly amazing what God has to say. And as you go through this thing, your first reaction is to say it ain't so. This is impossible to live up to, and it's really uncomfortable, Yahweh, to be this effusive in your appreciation. Appreciate it now, of course. Mostly it's gratifying to know that after 23 years of devotion from before sunrise to after sunset, 6 and 7 days a week, that's a lot of time.
That's pretty good dedication.
That it hasn't been squandered, that God's delighted. But it's very much the same as Yahshua. Yahshua didn't write this because he wanted me to feel all warm and fuzzy. And I can assure you that Yahweh didn't inspire the 112th Mizmor because he was blowing smoke. The reason for doing this, and the reason that we have to acknowledge what was prophetically conveyed, is because this is so important. The reason that the Kol voice of Yahweh, the Nakar, observant foreigner, the Bashar, herald, the Zeroah, one cultivating the harvest, the crag, rocky crag, if you will, the Malak in this particular sentence, the messenger, the Ad, restoring witness, and Edah. The reason there is more prophetic portrayals of what we will accomplish together than anything other than prophetic pronouncements regarding Dod. Far more than even Moshe, who will be mentioned here momentarily, is that there is no other alternative. We either prevail and get Yisrael's attention and get them to recognize that Yahweh has but one name, and it isn't Hashem, and that he is returning, and that he has a son, a firstborn, with whom he is returning, and it was Dod that fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim in year 4000 Yah, and it is Dod that is returning on Kippurim in year 6,000 Yah. And that between those events there are two harvests, Shabuah and Towrah, followed by the sacrifice of the red heifer. It's a lot to know. And yet if we did not break through the hard-headedness of Yisrael, who is in denial for a better part of 3,000 years, there would be no homecoming. There would be no Shabuah or Towrah harvest. There would be no mortal remnant benefiting from the sacrifice of the red heifer. There would be no covenant family because no one would know that Dod fulfilled the Moed Mikre. And so there's a lot writing on this.
Yes.
And that's why Yahweh is so profuse in his prophetic pronouncements regarding this role. So throughout all of their afflictions and anguish, speaking of Yisrael and Yehudim, the messenger announcing the Malach presence and appearance, the presence and appearance is Yahweh's return, who is liberating and saving them, Yasha. Yasha is the primary Hebrew word for salvation. And with his love and due to his compassion and mercy, he will redeem them. That is the role that is played by this individual that has been introduced all the way back into the Torah, but certainly highlighted tremendously throughout Yeshayah, spoken of throughout the Mizmor Psalms, and even introduced to God's people at the commencement speech for Yahweh's home on Mount Moriah by Dod's son, Solomon. He will then lift them up and carry them away based upon everything which is previously transpired and will occur throughout eternity. The lifting up and carrying them away is the first part of Teruah. That's what happens on the evening of September 23rd, 2033. And then as the sun rises the next day, in advance of Yahweh's appearance, we'll liberate and save, redeem the mortal remnant of Yisrael.
Mm-hmm.
When they became recalcitrant and rebellious, they distressed and they grieved his set-apart spirit. This is the Ruach Kodesh. The Ruach Kodesh is the set-apart spirit of Yahweh. She is the maternal manifestation of God's nature. She is the part of Yahweh set apart from him that can interact with us in 3Dville. You know, we are a three-dimensional being stuck in the flow of time, and Yahweh is at least 7 dimensions. And a 7-dimensional being cannot enter a 6, 5, 4, 3, or even 2-dimensional realm. And in a 3-dimensional realm, they can interact with us, Yahweh can, as a 7-dimensional being, by dispatching his set-apart spirit. He can interact with us by his written testimony, the very things we're reading now. He can interact with us through his malach, whether they be mortal or spiritual messengers. And Yahweh has a nephesh soul, so he can project his nephesh soul into any construct of his desire, very much like an avatar, so that he can interact with his people that way. And for a period of time, Yahweh, very brief period of time, Yahweh spoke directly to the children of Yisrael. He showed them his light, if you will, during the Exodus on Mount Choreb, even at the base of Mount Choreb. But unfortunately, the children of Israel said, "We want you to shut up and go away." And God said, "Okay, I can live with that. I will then communicate to my irascible and rebellious children through prophets and then ultimately through a witness." And that is what God is doing today. So when they became recalcitrant and rebellious, they distressed and grieved his set-apart spirit. Therefore, he was transformed into their enemy, and he himself opposed them. There's only so much that even God can take. The waters of Meribah, for example, were so revolting that this being the fourth complete meltdown of the children of Israel, whom he had slaved from what would have been genocide and a torturous death at that. And yet, every step of the way, they were unappreciative. They were rebellious and disgusting. And after a while, and it only got to be worse as they entered the promised land and they did everything that God asked them not to do, and they did nothing that God asked them to do. And they chose to be religious as opposed to enjoy the relationship he intended for them. They ultimately stopped saying his name, buried it, trashed it, erased it. And so God just finally said, that's enough already. I'm not your father anymore. I'm not your God anymore. I have nothing that I want to do with you. And for better part of 3,000 years, that is the way that it has been between Yahweh and Israel. Preference, Israel's choice. A bad choice. But that's not how the story ends. And that's why there's so much prophetic ink about what we are doing. Then he remembered the days of old where Moshe and his people were brought up and out of the sea through the shepherding of his flock. It is where he placed his set-apart spirit within his midst. His honorable, courageous, radiant, and now famous Yahowah, protective shepherd. The one with the strength, resolve, and ability to prevail. Moshe. Such that with the right hand he divided the waters before their presence to engage and establish for himself an everlasting reputation and name. He led them through the depths of the sea, like a skipping swallow in the desert, so that they did not falter. Similar to the herds which descend into the valley, the Spirit of Yahweh settled upon and reassured him. In this way, you led your people, acting and engaging on your behalf to make for yourself an honorable name and splendid reputation as a leader, as a protector, as a liberator, as a savior, as a nurturer, as a communicator, as a shepherd. Yahweh did all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is particularly wonderful about this is that God's saying, yes, you have been embittered. And you've done everything you could imagine to annoy me, including erasing my name, denying my covenant, inverting the intent of my invitations to meet, disavowing my son, ignoring the Messiah and the fact that he is known and that he is returning, the man that I chose to be shepherd. So I'm going to go back to the time before the golden calf, before the waters of Meribah, before the meltdown of the spies. There was a happier time. And even though there was the initial meltdown as the children of Israel were on the Egyptian side of the Gulf of Aqaba, Egyptian army pursuing them, and they had their first meltdown at that moment. And Moshe said, "What am I supposed to do?" And God says, "Come on. Lift up your staff. We'll part the sea. You'll walk across. I'll drown them. It'll all be good." And it was just a wonderful moment between God and his shepherd, between God and the first Yahowah, between God and this great liberator, this 80-year-old man whom Yahweh loved, Moshe. And so he remembered that moment. He doesn't want to talk about what followed, but that was a stellar moment.
Yeah.
And said, "I remember, old Moshe. Remember the people? I brought them out of the sea. I was their shepherd, and not only was I their shepherd, I engaged a shepherd on their behalf. And I placed my spirit on that shepherd, just as Yahweh would do another shepherd, his name was David, thereafter." Now, we would not know that Moshe was a Yahowah if it were not for what Yahshua wrote on this occasion.
Right.
It is clear that Moshe speaks of a Yahowah, but the Yahowah that Moshe addresses is one who comes much, much later. But in this case, Yahweh was saying, "My courageous, my honorable Yahowah, this protective shepherd, the first of three Yahowah, is Moshe." And he traveled, walked halak, such that with the right hand he divided the sea. Here, Yahweh obviously parted the waters of the Gulf of Aqaba from where the children of Israel were standing, which would have been the sort of large beach, Mawiba beach, that is the only place where 600,000 people could congregate on the Egyptian side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And there happens to be a land bridge that goes across between what is now Arabia and the Sinai Peninsula there. Otherwise, even if you parted the water, you couldn't have walked down and up because the depths of the Gulf of Aqaba are too steep. But there is a land bridge there, and God was the one who parted the waters. But that's not his nature to take credit. So he's giving Moshe credit for parting the waters. And you might say, "Come on, Moshe didn't part the waters, his staff, that's not so." According to God it is.
Yeah.
And the reason it is so is because God chooses to work through people. That's the whole reason he created the universe and conceived life. That's the reason the covenant exists. That's the reason the Torah exists. That's the reason we exist. And so since that is the prime directive, to build and enjoy a family and raise children, God chooses to work through his creation. Moshe just so happened to be one of the greatest of all implements, the honorable Yahowah. And so God is crediting Moshe for having divided the sea because he's delighted that Moshe listened to him and did as he had requested. And the waters before their presence parted. And by so doing, Yahweh developed an everlasting reputation and name, a Shem Olam. And yet, if you were to ask a Yehud, what is God's name? Most would say Hashem. G-D.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not correct. It's Yahweh. He led them through the depths of the sea like a skipping swallow in the desert, such that they did not falter. Now, he literally pulled the children of Israel kicking and dragging out of Mitzrayim is very different than what he is going to do in this final Exodus. You either come willingly or not at all. That's why Jeremiah 31 says that the covenant, the children of Israel during the Exodus, is different than the covenant that he will establish with them upon his return. And the difference is free will.
Mm-hmm.
The children of Israel did not know Yahweh. They had been slaves. They had nothing going for them. They were controlled by the most powerful nation on earth. They were treated as animals.
Mm-hmm.
And so when God sent a 80-year-old shepherd to retrieve them, there was obviously some doubt as to whether this was all going to work out. And they had known nothing but you keep your head down and you play in the mud all day and you get to live another day. That was their routine. That was their normal. And so to remove them from that, God had to have a firm hand. That's not going to be the case as we move forward. You will either choose to be with Yahweh or that will be the end of your life. So similar to the herds which descended in the valley, the Spirit, again the Ruach of Yahweh, settled upon and reassured him, Moshe. And in this way, you led your people, acting and engaging on your behalf to make for yourself an honorable name and splendid reputation, Shem. Yahweh was really serious about his name. As a matter of fact, when Solomon gave the commencement speech upon the completion of the what's called the first temple. It's not a temple at all. It is called a Yahos, a Bayeth. And it is a Bayeth Shem. And not just a Bayeth Shem, it's a Bayeth Shem Yahweh. And it's stated over and over again that this house exists for the name of Yahweh. And what's the one thing that Israel has written out of their lives? Yahweh's name. And if you're not going to be celebrating Yahweh's name, there is no reason for the building. God's not living there. God lives in the seventh dimension, in Shamayim. This was a house for his name. And because when you embrace your name, or his name, you become part of his family. Now, I wanted to share this at this point because Yasha's pronouncement that Moshe was the first of three Zeroah and that the Spirit of Yahweh was upon him as it was and remains on the other two. This links the past with the present, just as God said, I remembered these days, and that is God's style. Yahweh conveyed his intent by working with Moshe, his Zeroah, protective shepherd, inspiring him with his Ruach Kodesh, set-apart spirit, and guiding him with his Yamim, right hand. And in this way, Yahweh was able to Ra'ah, shepherd his flock, bringing them home. He would do the same thing with the ultimate Zeroah, Dod, who served as the Pesach El, the sacrificial lamb. Well, even now in the present day, with the third Zeroah, cultivating the harvest, he is committed to reestablishing Yahweh's name while accurately representing Moshe's Torah. So that in this way, the children of Israel will answer their father's Mikra invitations and follow them back to the Bereth covenant as time flickers away. To satisfactorily complete this mission, and otherwise irrelevant and unqualified Goy, a Gentile, has been supported by 7 marvelous manifestations of Yahweh's Ruach Spirit. That is so different than what we're told happened with the first two Zeroah. With Moshe, the Spirit of Yahweh came upon him, singular.
Mm-hmm.
With Dod, the moment that he was anointed the Messiah at 8 years old, and Yahweh says, I have chosen him, he was anointed with Yahweh's Spirit, singular. Now this time with the Choder, introduced by Yahshua in the 11th chapter of his treatise on the life and times of Yisrael from beginning to end, and his textbook on how to be a proper Choder, as well as how to recognize one. God speaks in first person and says that he is applying 7 spirits to this Choder, this stem or sucker that is growing out of the rootstock of Dod David. And there's only a couple of reasons that Yahweh would go all in. 7 spirits as opposed to 1 spirit. One of those reasons is likely time. When Moshe, Gulf of Aqaba, to the base of Mount Choreb, 3,500 years remained for Israel to come to know Yahweh and to become part of his covenant family. When Yahweh anointed Dod with his Spirit, 3,000 years remained. That's a lot of time to get it right. Unfortunately, over that period of time, particularly the last 3,000 years, with the exception of a handful of prophets, no one listened. 2,500 years, there wasn't a single Yehud listening to God or acting upon what he had to say. So if time is one reason, the second reason would be consequence. If this mission as the Choder does not prevail as Yahweh has designed it, then the Shabuah harvest, the Teruah harvest of covenant members does not transpire either. There will be no mortal remnant left of Yisrael for the red heifer to purge. And as a result, there can be no family reunion and there is no homecoming on Kippurim. And therefore, there is no camping out on planet Earth for 1,000 years in celebration of Sukkah. It's literally all for naught. Rather than God returning and restoring the earth to the conditions in the Garden of Eden, God would have destroyed it. That is what's at stake. And God's a real smart fellow. He knew that after 3,000 years of going from a handful of people to nobody listening to him, part of his covenant family, speaking on his behalf, that there was absolutely no chance that that was going to change unless he intervened and made it so. And that's why there's so much prophecy regarding the way that he would go about doing this. And this is a very different mission with the Choder than it has been with Yah's prophets, the last of which was Malachi, 447 BCE, exactly 1,000 years after the first of them, Moshe. And the difference is, with this enormous chasm of time, 3,500 at the greatest to 2,500 years at the shortest, to speak of things that would occur and to write them down and then to manage to leave an extant witness to those prophecies, Dead Sea Scrolls, such that when they are fulfilled in the distant future, you have proof that God actually witnessed our future and reported our future in our past and was accurate 100% of the time. And therefore, the testimony of the prophets, he validates in this way.
Yes.
When I began this mission, though, there was 32 years left. And I was green and raw. Green in the sense that I was growing and receptive. But we're talking about I had the knowledge of a barley seed. And maybe that's being too kind. This time, rather than just doing a data dump and saying, I tell you this, you tell the people that, the job of the witness would be to learn from the prophets. God wanted it this way because he wanted his people to know that the truth has always been available to them. That if they had paid attention to what he communicated to them 2,500 to 3,500 years ago, they would know his name. They would be part of the covenant. They would be attending the Moed Mikre correctly. There wouldn't be the need to engage a goy. But they didn't. And now with no time left to write down a series of prophecies to have them fulfilled as articulated, God was going to have to validate the witness of his voice, of his son's herald, of this choder stem off the original rootstock another way. It's very clever what he did.
Yes.
What he did is he said, I have proven that Yahshua was an inspired prophet. I have proven that Dode, my son, was an inspired prophet. I have proven that Moshe was an inspired prophet, as well as Hoshe, as well as Yoel, as well as Zechariah and Malachi. And I will speak of the role this man will play in awakening my people and reintroducing my name to them, and his role in inviting them to become part of the covenant again and enjoy the homecoming. And if I have all of my prophets speak of him, and that message is consistent, and he shares with you what my prophets have said, you have absolute proof that this is my plan. This is the man that I have chosen to do these very things, and that he's right. And you should listen to him, because the fate of your soul hangs in the balance. That is why this is said. Go ahead, Kirk.
No, I was just going to say to that point as to validity of this is, in the Israel Museum it's called the Shrine of the Book, which that's where they have the Yahshua scroll, which is 2,400 years old. I mean, you can read translating. Right. It's not like pick this out of a local Bible and made up this story. Everything.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that the most material found in the caves above Qumran, in terms of Yahweh's testimony, prophetic testimony, wasn't actually the Isaiah scroll. The Isaiah scroll happens to be the only complete scroll from beginning to end. The entire scroll is present, and this is the textbook on how to be a choder, how to recognize a choder, how to capitalize upon the choder.
Right.
And so it's not surprising that this is the one complete scroll, because it is a textbook that has to be read and understood from beginning to end.
Makes sense.
But the most material is actually from the Mizmor, the Dodes. Songs. And it is what we have gleaned from Dode songs that is the most amazing of all discoveries. Dode volunteered to serve as the Pesach Gael, and that he fulfilled Passover on yeasted bread and firstborn children, that he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God,
game changer,
and that he is our returning King. And of course, there are copies upon copies of the Torah as well. But what's also interesting is that I began this work in 2001. And while the Dead Sea Scrolls were found right around 1950 to 55 to 60, right around the time I was born, they weren't published. It wasn't until just a few years prior to the time God asked me to engage in this mission that the first hints of what was said on those scrolls was released. And the first actual text that you could read comparing the combined message of the Dead Sea Scrolls to the Masoretic text was actually published in the year I began.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. Wow. So God supplies what is needed. So a choder, or stem, a sucker. Sucker is actually a very positive term here. We view it negatively in the English language. But a sucker is a new growth that emerges from the fallen stump or the old rootstock of a tree that has decayed or fallen down, giving that rootstock new life. And the sucker can be very productive. In fact, that's really the best way to transplant and build a new orchard out of prized olive trees. And the most common prophetic accolade title for Dode, Shemek, is branch. He is the main branch off the tree of lives because he fulfilled Pesach. But his Bashar, his herald, is a stem off of that branch. He is also a branch off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and of both, because he is sharing the knowledge of God while also condemning the evil that is religion and politics. So this choder, which is the term that is found in Yeshayah chapter 11, is said to be growing out of the rootstock of Dode. David uses his father's name. His father's name is only used to speak of where Dode was, because Yishai was a real jerk of a man. But his name is important because his name means stand out and be noticed, which is the calling. And Yah announced that he would be a Nakri, it's Nakar in Isaiah, which is an observant and responsive foreigner, thereby able to compile what Yahweh calls a nesh, which is a banner or sign. That's the books under the Yahweh series. Then serving as the third Zeroah, which is a capable arm, sowing the seeds, producing a fruitful harvest to enrich his Bereth covenant family, while reinforcing his marvelous reputation and honorable name. If you are a Yehud Jew and feel slighted that after speaking exclusively through Yisrael, Yahweh would choose a Goy, a Gentile, to call the chosen people back home, you're perceptive. It's embarrassing that Yahweh had to get your attention this way. Nevertheless, he desires and values your company, so he deployed a Goy because there was no other way to get your attention. And it shouldn't be all that surprising because everything with Yahweh comes full circle, just as we began our relationship with God in Eden. On Sukkah, we're returning to Eden-like conditions as Yahweh transforms the earth back into that garden. Well, the same thing is true with the Goy versus Yahud, the first individuals that Yahweh engaged with. Adam, Yahowah, Noah, his sons, Abraham and Sarah, and their son Yishak, and even Yishak's sons, they were Goy.
Mm-hmm.
All of them. It wasn't until Jacob was renamed Yisrael, and through Leah and Rachel that and the children of Yisrael got to their start, that there were any Israelites. And oh my goodness, what a terrible start. You know, my wife was writing a song, and she wanted to know what the names of all of Leah's children meant. And if you look up Leah's children, it's pretty easy to find their names, and Yahweh actually provides insights into the meaning of the names and the context of the discussions regarding them. But you know, Leah had a daughter. Most people never speak of the daughter. Her name was Dinah. It's the same basis as Dan of Daniel. It means to judge. She was raped.
Yes. And
the man that raped her wanted to claim her. And he came to Jacob and said, you know, I'll give you whatever you want. Money's no object. You name your price. I want to buy her. And Jacob, very much like Abraham before him, his grandfather, sure. Abraham pimped out Sarah for money twice. And so the first children of Israel, they chime in and say, yeah, that'd be fine, but we have a couple of requests. One is they all have to be circumcised. Yeah, if he's circumcised, it'll be fine, just because we're saying that she'll be owned by her rapist. And then the children of Israel, the first children of Israel, reneged on their agreement. And while the men of the rapist tribe were healing from having been circumcised as adults, they went in and slaughtered them. Yes, they did. The whole story stinks to high heaven. And it just tells you that there is really no time that Israel was anything other than irascible. And that probably is putting it too kindly. Anyway, God is God, people are people, and God created the universe for a purpose. He wants to have a family, even if there is only going to be a handful of people involved. He's going to have his family. So please look down and choose to respond. Yahshua speaks to Yahweh from the spiritual realm, and see from your magnificent, set apart and honorable dwelling, where, as a reflection of your nature, your passion and zeal, combined with your ability to perform doing great things, are abundantly enriching, such that your compassion and mercy for me influence my thinking and well as my emotional response. I see Isaiah 63:15. So that we can bring a greater perspective to this role and the result of the Zeroah, this cultivator of the harvest, turned Adamah Parah, red heifer. We're going to turn now to the Torah. As stated previously, Yada will be providing the last opportunity to resolve the religious guilt of Yisrael, commensurate with what Yahshua just asked of Yahweh. And this is guilt that Yisrael has wallowed in as if pigs in a sty. there will be no retreating or wandering away from Yahweh this time. Come sunset, an individual is either family or they'll be gone for good. Also, by tying the ashes of the parah, productive and fruitful one, to an asaf harvest, reminds us that Yahweh is still gathering his people and bringing them together. And now it is the final remnant who were deliberately left behind the evening of Towrah during the final gleaning. And they were left because they're filthy. They are still wallowing in religious and political muck. And now with the cleansing waters flowing off the Temple Mount, beneath the burning pyre of the red heifer, many will be washing their clothes again in anticipation of seeing and hearing their God after 3,840 years of separation and silence.
Wow.
Stunning.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's 3,480 years. I think there's two numbers there are changed around. So we'll make that correction to the record. So, the one who gathers up and harvests the ashes. Now, this is from Numbers 19:10. We're returning to the midst of the presentation of the Adamah Parah, the red heifer, speaking of Eliah's role in officiating these events. So the one who gathers up and harvests the ashes of the fruitful heifer, the parah, will wash and cleanse his apparel. And he'll be unclean as a witness until sunset. And this will be for the children of Israel as well as for the newcomer of a different ethnicity dwelling therein, who lives and remains on a journey within their midst as a perpetual and eternal, everlasting, inscribed prescription for living that cuts them into the relationship. The ashes of the fruitful heifer not only cleanse those who have gathered in Israel on this Towrah 10 days before Yahweh's return with Dod, but for Israelite and Goyim alike, those who choose to accept the cleansing of those waters and the purging of that ash will live on. Because this is a perpetual and eternal, everlasting, inscribed prescription for living, a chukah to the relationship. This is not a passing fancy. This is for all time. The realization that this one life, that of a goy, matters so much to Yahweh and to Yisrael that the remembrance of his sacrifice on behalf of the family reunion is going to be celebrated forever. And that's extraordinary. And so, like most anyone, given this opportunity, my only regret is having to wait until the last minute. I would offer that life today, but I also know that I have a year and a half remaining to continue to broadcast this message, and then I will have 3.5 years with Elia to witness to Yahweh's testimony, to his restoring message to humankind prior to his return. So there's a lot to accomplish. There's a lot to do. There are many family members to be born anew into the covenant. There's Israelites to save. Now, I admire Yahweh's plan, and I'm glad that he offered me the time to figure it out on my own. I did not know anything about this role until Yahshua introduced us to it. And even then, it was just a matter of months ago that God finally revealed his answer. So where do you think you're going on Towrah? Yahshua was exceedingly articulate and giving that answer, which is that after the final gleaning, I'm not going anywhere. I've become as mortal as the Israelites that were left behind. I am truly appreciative that Yahweh waited until I was not only able to process what he was asking, but was so committed to his son and to his family that I'm honored to know that he would trust me to do this for his people. And I'm humbled by the realization that my life matters to God. It matters to his people. And that in the end, I will have managed to live up to his expectations. The sacrifice of the red heifer, this fruitful man who was bloodied and red and then tossed on the ground after being bludgeoned, will transform the remnant of the children of Israel, removing their guilt, so that they are prepared as they once were 3,480 years ago, this time just moments before Yahweh's return. The ordeal of the Adam Parah, as Yahweh planned it and Elia will perform it, is a prescription for living. It's a chukah. It is what must occur to prepare Yisrael to welcome Yahweh back into their lives. The fruitful and productive one not only cuts them back into the covenant family, the sacrifice of the red heifer will be part of our lives going forward forevermore, just as Dode's fulfillment of Pesach and Matzah live on forever. And that's important because it means that Yahweh explained the way he and his people will ultimately be reconciled 3 millennia before this approach would be made available. Now that's patience. And it has such marvelous symmetry, and that the one who was the first to reveal that Dode fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim, preparing the covenant family to capitalize upon the Shabuah and Teruah ingatherings, is now the one making the king's homecoming possible. It's beautiful. Before we venture into the story of Eliah's dress rehearsal for this day, which will be the subject of our program next week, and then into the story of Dode's reconciliation with his reformed whore, which will be the story that we'll tell in future programs, speaking of the adulterous woman who is Yisrael, I'd like to take one last look at the prophecy which brought us to this place, and that will be the conclusion of our program this evening.
Okay.
Then there will exist something which can be compared to the collecting and bringing together of an intensely dramatic ingathering. The removal and receiving of a harvest, cutting away and reaping during a short but vexing time. It is of standing grain, deeply rooted, steadfast, upright, and established. And his Zeroah, the one who is cultivating the seeds sown for his harvest to be fruitful and productive, will reap the harvest with unfolding implications, cutting the value crop away from what is a very troubling time. This being of first fruits, forming an overflowing torrent, moving swiftly from one place to another in linear fashion as a river of life, In addition, there will be a time certain, that which is similar to a rapid gleaning of what is left behind, and a final ingathering to be quickly prepared and removed, this of first fruits, flowing from one place to another in linear fashion. In the profound depths of Raphaim, where the sick have been healed, and the defective have been restored, while the feeble falter, and the souls of the dead remain. And he will remain, enduring being left behind, as flesh and blood, for having caused people with leavened physical bodies to be spared as a final remnant during it. Thrust aside and left on the stems and branches, as would be the case when an olive tree is beaten from all around to shake off some of the fruit. 2 or 3 mature olives in the topmost crucial and foremost vocal branch, 4 or 5 in the clefts of his crag, from his branches which have been broken off, of the fruitful and the productive heifer, of the one cultivating a flourishing and abundant harvest on behalf of future generations. Prophetically declares Yahowah, God of Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with the Almighty. Yeshayah 17:6. The conclusion of this prophecy speaks of the relationship the Rosh Amir, most essential and vocal branch, has developed with those who have been estranged. He is shown protecting them within the fissures of his crag. And while this is certainly sufficient to identify the Zeroah as the Choder named crag, we are told that he will become Parah, a fruitful heifer, engaged in a productive harvest on behalf of future generations. And now we know his ultimate role, even his fate. Yeshayah has revealed the future. The Shabuah harvest of standing grain, comprised of Goyim and Yehudim, will be seen as a river of life from earth to heaven. The Towrah gleaning will follow 7 years later, with these ingatherings serving as bookends for the time of Yisrael's troubles. Then, by connecting this prophecy to the Torah, we find that as the sun rises over those deliberately left behind on Saturday, September 24th, 2033, the Zeroah responsible for cultivating these productive harvests will turn to the remaining remnant of Yisrael. He will let down his guards. He will allow Satan to kill him, recognizing the good that will result from his sacrifice as the par bull turned Parah heifer. It is interesting that Dod is the great ram leading the flock of Yisrael. Rams have horns, and yet when he served as the Passover lamb, the horns went away. Mm-hmm. He became sympathetic, defenseless. The bull that has served to trample down and gore serpents and snakes of all ilk, showing no fear, protected from all evil, will forego his horns as well, turning into the Parah heifer, a sympathetic figure that Yisrael will recognize the death as a sacrifice to give them life. It's times like these when it's hard to to know what to say, because we're in awe of our God and his prophets, particularly Moshe, Dod, Elia, and Yahshua. And yet, as his Rosh Amir, most essential and talkative choder stem, I guess, as well as the only one, which makes the superlative superfluous, I've noticed a pattern. God is magnanimous and exceedingly generous in his appreciation when his chosen live up to the expectations he has placed on us. He has a way of keeping us humble. For example, Dod, the roaring lion of Judah, the king of kings, who fought and won 66 consecutive battles, has rendered as a lamb in his most heroic and courageous moment. And after surviving thousands of death threats without a scrape, and decades of trampling down devilish men and demonic spirit as a fearless bull wherever I have found them, a moment I offer my life to prepare Yisrael for Yahweh's arrival, presented as a bloody cow. It's telling in a way. When we have Yahweh's full support, buttressed as we are by his Spirit, we are presented with the inspiring courage and strength of a lion and a bull. But when we step out on our own, let our guard down, and offer our lives to inferior beasts, we're vulnerable, even adorable creatures. I suspect God sees us both ways, and it is how he wants his family to view us in these decisive roles. A roar becomes a baha. A snort becomes a moo. Even my buddy, my brother Yahshua, couldn't help himself. The crag is cracked and fissured by this time, telling us that he is not only old and weathered, but that his many battle scars have become obvious. And so while he is painting this amazing scene accurately as a prophet must, it is laughable that after revealing all of the choder's credentials, he actually just pulls a word out of obscurity to call him a Amir, a talkative stick. So I guess I represent that statement.
Yes.
Musings aside, there is still more to say about bulls and about heifers, about ashes and water, about rebellion and reconciliation. It'll be time as we begin our program next week to move on to Eliah's practice run before a similarly religious and political audience. It's such a pleasure to be able to learn what Yahweh had to say, to be able to understand his message, and then be given the opportunity not only to share it, but to share it with God's endorsement and blessing. The greatest job in the universe.
Yes, sir.
And we are all appreciative as members of this covenant family of being part of it. So we thank you, Yahweh, for allowing us to convey to your people your nature, your name, your intent for all of our lives. And we appreciate the fact that you are so approachable, indeed lovable, so different than the God of religion. A God who wants children to grow up with him, to experience the universe together. It is indeed the Bereth covenant that brings us together as family. Well, Kirk, it's been a pleasure. We'll do this again this time next week. We'll start with Towrah, Life or Death, the ultimate dress rehearsal, as we delve into what Yahweh introduced us to, that Elia actually performed 2 millennia, 888 years in advance of reprising his role over the red heifer. Well, may Yahweh bless. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Our best to everyone who is in search of a relationship with the Creator God of the universe. Good night.
Thank you. Good evening.